Welcome back to another installment in our writing and AI series. And very excited for us to have a conversation up here next on AI-assisted pre-writing. And so as this is the first of a number of videos that we're going to have that actually talk about what it looks like for AI to come alongside that writing process for students, or really for any of us, as we are writers for life, as you're learning and growing in that domain. And so I'm really grateful to Crystal Ernst of ESU2. And to Mike Kentz, who will give a chance to kind of speak to some of his consulting endeavors here later. But Mike and I had the opportunity to connect through a colleague, and he's been gracious enough to give of his time and his insights in this conversation today and his expertise. And so former English teachers all around, and we're excited to lean into this conversation. And I think the first thing we want to say from the onset here is that with this and really consistently, and we have a whole video on this in our series, is you need to look at the standards and say, okay, what is being assessed? And so if certain aspects of the pre-writing or brainstorming or putting a topic sentence together are part of what the students expected to do independently and of their own, keep the AI out of that step. We're practicing that. That's a skill trying to be fostered. But when and where we're able to do this either before or alongside or after a particular step in the writing process, let's think about what that might look like. And so I'm grateful that we have our two experts to provide some insight here today. So with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to Mike and give us a little bit of your kind of thoughts, I guess, as people are approaching this idea.
Yeah, I think one of the sort of underrated benefits of using AI in the writing process is that it actually facilitates a lot of metacognition, and it can create opportunities for students to reflect in ways that they really either haven't before or maybe are struggling with. And so one of the interesting things that you might consider doing with this pre-writing process is saying to yourself, okay, we're going to use AI as a brainstorm partner, but before we do, what types of prompts are we going to write to make this bot act as a really helpful coach for us and a partner rather than something that's going to replace the entire thinking process? And so what goes into that, if you've used AI a lot, you probably already have a sense of this, but what goes into it is a lot of context. And so we can really teach our students how to include context in, for example, a prompt is really just a question. It's a collaborative question, and it's something that we've been doing in schools forever. And now we're just possibly using a bot to do it as well. So teaching them to include context in a given prompt is really a writing skill and a communication skill as well. And what it will also do is, of course, give the bot more information to be a more effective brainstorm partner. And the way that we really, one of the ways that we can teach context inclusion is to focus on personal reflection and goal and purpose. And so one procedure that I did with my students last year was have them write an AI purpose statement before they actually used AI. And the purpose statement, there's a number of different ways to go about this, but ultimately what you're doing is asking yourself, of course, what's my goal? What's my objective? But also, what do I know and what do I not know? Or what ideas do I have and what am I struggling with? And that's, of course, metacognition and reflection. And it also becomes a part of the context. And from there, you end up having like kind of a nice piece of writing. If that's sort of that purpose statement is really very similar to a journal entry in a lot of ways. And then it becomes the impetus for the AI interaction itself. And it creates a much more healthy interaction that you can even monitor yourself. And you can get a sense of, okay, how deep is my student able to go? How can I help my student go deeper in this metacognition process as they brainstorm with or without AI, to be honest?
Yeah, and as we're talking about that too, I would encourage folks to either look in the playlist here or on the resource that you're accessing this video through for insights on which tools you might be able to leverage at different grade levels, or depending upon, there's different age restrictions for some of these, but there are opportunities to do the very thing that Mike is talking about, just finding the right place to have that sort of lived out. And I'm going to throw things over to Crystal now too, that with that is sort of some context for us. Give us some insights, I guess, with regards to how this isn't just replacing the process, right? Like how is this not just taking away from of the valuable skill being able to work through this step of writing?
Yeah. So whenever we teach anything, right, process product, we have to think firm goals, flexible means. There's a UDL video, right? Yep. Check that one out. But we don't want to change what the ask is in the standard. we don't want to accommodate to the point where students aren't meeting grade level expectations. So firm goals, flexible means. But when we do that, we have to look at the holistic view of what writing is asking of students. So this theoretical model, there's many different generations of this on the internet, a lot of research behind it, but basically it's saying there are 3 pieces to write good composition. Students have to have good transcription, which is the spelling and the act of writing, executive function, which is attention, prioritizing, starting tasks, and then text generation, which is what we really want at the end. But our working memory isn't limitless. So how do we use AI to accommodate the other areas so we can produce good text generation? So executive function is one that a lot of students struggle with. AI, and like Mike said, if we have really good prompting, can help them start to generate some really good ideas and not give them the answers, but coach their thinking. They can also give sentence stems so students can start positive text generation and still be able to attend to the task and to talk about just that writing process, the transcription, spelling. My favorite tool for this is Goblin Tools, because you can put in the task and it will give them all of the things. It'll break down the task into steps so that executive functioning for students who struggle to get started and pay attention, it's going to create that to-do list for them so they can attend to the task of writing. And it'll give them time frames in order to predict how long that task will take them. So we just accommodate within that framework so we can focus working memory on where we want it.
That's super interesting. And I hope that as folks view this video or the videos in this series, the reason we invite multiple perspectives on is to see different ways in which you can view the different aspects of the writing process and the pieces of this conversation. We alluded to UDL just a moment ago and those connections that we're making with best practices. And so with that, then, in trying to now maybe build upon the different viewpoints that have been represented in our conversation to this point, Mike, where does that sort of land with you or cause you to think next if we're continuing to try to support educators in just being open to thinking more broadly about the nuances in this process?
Yeah, I think the next step is if we're going to put AI in front of students, like Crystal said, for things like executive function or pre-writing or brainstorming, and we want them to interact in a certain way, we also have to be willing to give them a model. And that's just good teaching. It's good instruction. We all know that as teachers. It's a little bit funky, a little bit weird right now because we're not entirely sure about what a model looks like. But it's more doable than I think most teachers realize. And so one way that you can kind of show your students the model or the exemplar of an AI interaction in this particular context is to go into that tool that you're either comfortable with or you want your students to use and imagine you're the student and imagine you're doing the task the same way we would generate a model essay, right? And then interact with the AI in a way that you would want your students to interact, and then interact with the AI in a way that you might not want them to as well. And if you show them that exemplar, non-exemplar, I think writing teachers, especially middle school and high school writing teachers, are going to be like, I recognize this because this is really how you teach the essay at those levels. But showing the exemplar, non-exemplar of the interaction that you want to see and don't want to see, your students will then have a vision of how they should at least try to interact with the AI. And, there's definitely bumps along the road because it's a very subjective, abstract process, but showing them goes a long way towards making them more AI literate. And it also goes a long way towards making sure that these interactions are healthy and helpful.
Yeah, so as students have the opportunity to interact with, whether it's, and we referenced this before we started recording today, that School AI would be a space to potentially do some of these steps as well that would be student friendly. But yeah, being able to model for them what that interaction should look like so that they are still fostering those same skills, but also getting their AI literacy piece to complement that. And then you could, in addition to that, also leverage the AI from the teacher's side to create an exemplar. And so we're kind of like working a little like meta, as Mike was talking about there a second ago, but then also have that as an opportunity. Crystal, yeah, in the midst of all that, what would you add?
I love how Mike said have teachers use that AI as an example and that anchor for students, because I think the more we use it, we're going to start to see the deficits in it. So I think there's kind of this fear that if we let students use AI, they're not going to do any of the thinking. They're going to type in a prompt and it's going to make this composition and they're going to hand it in. But as we start to experience it and work towards those exemplars of an essay, we're going to realize there's a lot of input that's required. to generate that output that we would consider high quality. So to, as a teacher, go through that process and see what types of input require for a less than exemplar, and then that high anchor. It's really good process for us to go through as the adults. And then we're going to see how it's not just a one and done, and how AI can really lend itself to high quality work.
Yeah, and Mike, is somebody who's worked with students in the classroom, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah.
All this, right?
Yeah. Crystal hit the nail on the head. I think that was something, you know, especially as a writer myself, as an English teacher, I was very reluctant and reticent to onboard or work with AI. I was quite frankly upset about AI being released when it first did. And it took me basically a full year to kind of come around and say, okay, you know, I'm going to, sort of work within this reality, learn how to use this myself, develop a little AI literacy for myself, because I can't teach my students how to use it the right way if I don't know how to use it the right way myself. And what Crystal just talked about, you know, working with it enough where you start to feel, you know, what you need to do to make it actually effective versus, you know, at what point are you maybe not doing enough? And then now you can go talk to your students about that, and you can show them. And the next thing you know, everybody's kind of becoming a more safe and responsible user of AI. And to Crystal's point, making better work, more creative, deeper work, which is where I think we're going with this. It's just going to take some time until we figure it all out.
Yeah, and here's a direction that I was hoping to go with this. And so push back on this to the degree it doesn't make sense. But to build off of that, then to become familiar or comfortable with it, then would lead to you being able to think about different places within the process to leverage it, and even places within the pre-writing itself. And so it would look different, for example, if students are able to use a chatbot to help them generate ideas before they've done any of that themselves. Because now you're saying, okay, what is the prompt? What is the task? Some of the things we've talked about up to this point already, right? Like what is it that we're really trying to get out of this? Or am I going to create maybe a brainstorming list on my own, and then from that, upload that and ask what ideas aren't there, and get into an entirely, but maybe not even different, but just it expedites that interaction, or just changes the entry point is probably the way I would want to say that, of the timeline with which you might go through certain steps. Some more practical ideas here as we kind of bring things to a little bit of a close. What do we actually mean? What might it look like for that chatbot interaction, or for that tech tool to support a piece of that?
I think some of the ways I would maybe use it for pre-writing specifically, and I like, Andrew, your idea of I could ask for ideas, or I could put the ideas and ask what I'm missing. If the goal is for students to come up with their own ideas and their own content, I could put my ideas in and ask it to craft my thesis statement, so I can start building my outline from there. Because thesis statements are structure, it's not the idea. So remember that firm goal, flexible mean, what am I willing to give? Same thing with the synthesis. Maybe they've started to do their research and they have their ideas, but they don't know how to compile them. AI can do that for them. And so there's a lot of ways they could take their input and have it kind of take it to the next level, and then take that back out of the AI and then start to work with it from there.
Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, piggybacking on this, and again, it really does depend on the goal and your overall objective as the teacher. But there's one way to think about it is, you know, binary tasks versus non-binary tasks. So tasks where there is no right or wrong answer, that's a very different process versus, for example, you know, synthesizing can be very, very helpful, but oftentimes there's kind of, you know, a very specific structure we're looking for. With the thesis, you're usually giving them a pretty specific structure you want to see, versus brainstorming, which is non-binary in nature, right? The value of the idea is very subjective, both in the student's eyes and in your eyes as a teacher. And so asking yourself that before you put it in front of them, if it's a open-ended task, okay, then that's a different assessment process for me as the teacher versus something where there is a right and wrong answer. And I don't think to sort of get back to your question, Andrew, like, where does it fit? It's very, very circumstantial. I'm not trying to deflect or be vague, but it really is circumstantial. So just asking yourself those questions as the teacher gets you a couple steps closer, again, to figuring out what the objective is.
This is why I'm so grateful for everyone contributing, because I'm learning through this whole thing. And like, in addition to that, I'm just sitting here saying to myself, Gosh, yeah, I'm thinking about the writing process more as having a little bit more of a linear structure to it, but there might be a myriad of ways of doing that, and even leveraging AI to help me better understand that my process isn't everyone's process, and what it might look like to even offer 4 processes like that for students to then go, this kind of fits my thinking in this particular instance. And that's its own like way of kind of even structuring your own process for pre-writing. All those things said, thank you both for your time as we kind of bring this a little bit to a close. If you're accessing this on YouTube, make sure that you check out this resource, because that's where we have all the videos and some of our additional links and point to websites and other resources to round all this out. Mike, thank you in particular for your time in joining us. And so can you kind of tell us a little bit more about your site and very briefly here as we bring things to a close?
Yeah, sure. At Zainetek, we're offering what I call a CRAFT program, which stands for Collaborative Reform for AI-Focused Teaching. And it's a free program. We meet every other Tuesday night. I've got about 30 teachers from middle school all the way up to university level. And what we're doing is essentially sharing assessment practices across different disciplines and contents, sharing materials and resources, and trying to map this entire process out. And from there, we're getting some really interesting ideas. And it's really, really interesting to see how different it is for example, writing a research paper versus a literary analysis paper. Or even we have computer science teachers and art teachers and business teachers. And so being there for that, I have found very valuable, and I think other people do too. So if you want to sign up, go to the website. There's a sign up on the products page, and we'd love to have you there.
There you go. So make sure you check that out. If you want to listen to a recent episode where we got a chance to talk long form with Mike about these topics, definitely check out the podcast. And lastly, and as always, make sure that you reach out to your local ESU if you're here in Nebraska, as we have folks like Crystal all across the state who are rock stars and therefore regional support as well. So thank you both for your time, and we encourage everybody to watch the next video in this series.